we have heard the herd immunity concept being disputed by many scientists, given how widely spread this disease has become. And yet here in the U.S., with so many now vaccinated, with very effective vaccines like Moderna or Pfizer, could that be a possibility? Could we achieve some kind of herd immunity?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that herd immunity is not a number. As we increase vaccination, and as the United States, for instance, is more successful at getting even more than 50% of people fully vaccinated all over the country, infection rates will decrease. But I think that the more important thing is that this increase in vaccination rates will decrease the number of severe cases requiring hospitalization and decrease the number of deaths. It will decrease the size of outbreaks because the presence of vaccinated people in a crowd has a slowing down effect on the spread of the virus. And then ultimately, the idea would be that with this response, economies will be able to open up. So herd immunity is an important idea, but the most important thing is for countries to begin vaccination and to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but how can you open up your borders when other countries really have been so far lagging when it comes to those vaccinations, right? What will it take to get them to catch up?
That's a great point. When you look at the 1.6 billion doses of vaccine that have gone out worldwide, the lowest income countries in the world have used less than 1% of that vaccine. If you include the lower middle and lower income countries, it's 15% of that vaccine. So there's a huge global gap in vaccination, and this has three important consequences. There's a humanitarian consequence. 3.5 million people have died from COVID, and modeling says that if we don't do better at sharing these vaccines, global COVID deaths will double. The economic consequences are such that if the high-income countries, vaccinate their own people exclusively, the estimate is, and this is now 3 different sources, that high-income economies, so economies like the United States, will suffer $4 to $5 trillion in additional losses because equity cannot be ensured. And the final crisis is a biological one. We know that where there are uncontrolled outbreaks, new variants are being generated. And it would be a horrible thing for a new variant to undermine $20 billion worth of work developing 10 safe and effective vaccines. So really, we need to be able to address the global COVID outbreak more equitably.
When it comes to places like Australia, the vaccine rollout has been very slow, but other people say, well, we don't really have much of the virus. Here, a cluster of 9 is considered to be a really serious outbreak. Can certain countries that have gone for the elimination strategy afford to take longer to roll out the vaccines?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to how much longer can we put up with this? For instance, South Korea was lauded early on in the pandemic for its ability to bring the infections under control. After a year and a half, I think people are getting tired and complacent. And I think you've seen the effect of complacency in some of the Asian countries that had targeted, 0 infections. So at some point, we're going to need to vaccinate people so that people can gather now without the same level of concern about the potential for spread of the virus. And that, another city in Australia won't need to be locked down because of, a couple of cases appearing. I mean, those are going to be important steps forward as Australia readjusts itself to life after the pandemic.
You talk about complacency and I think you allude to fatigue, right? What does that mean ongoing? Because I kind of want to know whether you see this as developing into a measles type situation or a seasonal flu type situation.
So, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, well, since we know that distancing and masks and avoiding crowds works, all we have to do is wait for the vaccine and we'll be able to get it out. But there have been a number of waves of the pandemic in countries all over the world, and these pandemics are generating far more mutants than I would have guessed would have been possible. So, we are hopefully, with the current set of vaccines, able to, if we can vaccinate people fast enough, control the outbreaks and generate a certain level of protection that will keep outbreaks from spreading, keep people out of hospitals. However, there are probably mutants out there that we aren't aware of, and new mutants will continue to be generated as these large outbreaks in India or South America, or unknown outbreaks, for instance, in Africa. And if we aren't tracking those mutants, and if we don't know how well the vaccines work, we could be in for a very, very unpleasant surprise. And I think the one thing to remind ourselves of continuously is we've always been, unfortunately, surprised by what the virus can do.
Right.
And rapid vaccination with the current vaccines appears to be effective. Now, not efficacious necessarily, but effective in controlling hospitalizations and maybe controlling spread. We need to get people vaccinated quickly.
Will waiving intellectual property rights in order to get other countries to make more supplies of vaccines help?
So just to start with that question, IVI really does believe we don't patent the vaccines, or we haven't patented the vaccines that we've tech transferred all over the world. But that being said, what we really need now is a supply of safe and efficacious, high quality vaccine. And waiving patent rights right now isn't going to do that. What we really need is to get as much vaccine made by high quality producers as possible, and in regulatory environments that are considered functional or strict, where regulatory agencies like the US FDA or the Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety are watching the companies and can verify that the companies are doing a good job. This is to alleviate the short to midterm supply question. In the longer term, would it be important for us to begin a discussion and get consensus and alignment around a scheme for being able to share not only intellectual property, not only the patent, but know-how around manufacturing a vaccine? So when a vaccine is transferred, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been said to have 50,000 steps. If you don't have the book on how to do that, it's going to take you months, years to develop a similar process. So we have to remember that there's a short term and a long term. The short term really is to get as much vaccine packaged, vialed as quickly as possible, and to get it into arms around.
Where would South Korea fit into that vaccine supply chain story?
That's a very interesting question given the developments last week. So South Korea is a vaccine manufacturer. South Korean companies also manufacture, or big manufacturers of monoclonal antibodies, so biologics. So they have US FDA and EMA recognized high quality product. Korea has innovation and research and development in vaccines. The Korean government has made actually several $100 million worth of investments in building up vaccine manufacturing and research and development capability. So, having the ability to do something and do it rapidly and to do it at high quality with a good regulatory regime in place, I think is going to be really critical. So over the short to midterm, Korea could be very important. And over the longer term, hopefully this growth in R&D and this Korean vaccine hub could be another potential source of economic growth for the country.
Dr. Kim, you've spent much of your career studying HIV treatment, and I'm just wondering, does the COVID vaccine experience make you more optimistic about how we could find vaccines for other illnesses in the future? Is it the science, is it the funding, or is it the political impetus that prevented us from being able to accelerate drug development the way that we've seen over the past 12 months?
Or all of the above. And it's really actually not being glib, but governments recognize, the United States government and CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, recognized early on that what they needed was to follow a model that would get them to a vaccine as quickly as possible, to de-risk the research and development for companies in order to accelerate timelines. And that's essentially what they did. With $20 billion worth of funding, they were able to tell the vaccine companies, we want this vaccine and we will purchase 100 million, 200 million doses at the end of the day. For a company, that actually provides an impetus to move things along quickly. But the other part of this is when you really think about who really helped the West develop these vaccines, it's the biotechs. BioNTech partnered with Pfizer, which is a major manufacturer, but it was BioNTech's technology. Moderna didn't have a vaccine approved. Novavax, no vaccine approved. AstraZeneca wasn't making vaccines. They partnered with Oxford, who had this innovative new technology. Johnson & Johnson had an Ebola vaccine, which didn't have much of a market, but very rapidly moved into this space with new technology. So really, it's important to recognize that these small companies were really engines of innovation and partnered with the right manufacturers could actually get back out and really helped us in the long run.